than 1,000 attempts to invent the light bulb, he never viewed those attempts as failures. Rather, he saw them as necessary steps toward making a better light bulb. And even though his invention made it possible for more people to affordably create light after it became dark, he was never completely satisfied with his invention. According to his great-grandsons, he was constantly tinkering to improve on his design, both in terms of longevity and the amount of energy a light bulb used. And he hoped others would continue his work to create a better light bulb. Though it seemed no one was investing their time on making a better light bulb, in 2006 a radical development occurred. Those funny-looking compact fluorescent bulbs, which barely use any electricity but generate a lot of light, came to market. And it took a while for those funny-looking bulbs to catch on. But once consumers realized the amount of energy and cost savings the light bulbs offered, the adoption of the light bulb began to grow and began to disrupt the 110-year traditional incandescent light bulb market. Suddenly, research and design laboratories began to move the goalposts as they began to unlock amazing possibilities. For example, Philips just announced a breakthrough claiming their newest light bulb will use barely 5 watts of power, yet produce the amount of lumens equal to a traditional 100-watt bulb, and will come with a 20-year warranty. This is an incredible disruption and an incredible change. However, not everyone is happy with the disruption this new technology has caused. Some grumble about the initial high costs of the bulbs, and some grumble that the LED lighting appears fake. Meanwhile, there are some light bulb manufacturers who refuse to adapt to change, hoping they can keep selling their more highly profitable traditional bulbs. Refusing to adapt to change, these bulb makers hired a lobbying firm to pressure the Department of Energy to allow them to keep marketing the less energy-efficient bulbs. And then these light bulb manufacturers even created a fake organization who have published misleading op-eds with hopes they could convince consumers that LED lights won't pay for themselves and even pose an environmental danger. Their strategy to avoid change is like the strategy adopted by the lamp makers and oil sellers used when Edison began to sell his light bulb in 1909. Oil lamp manufacturers claimed the light bulb was expensive, at about $23 a bulb in today's money, and that Edison's invention was dangerous. Your house will burn down if you use a light bulb. They were also inefficient and unpredictable. The parallel of what oil lamp manufacturers claimed and what modern light bulb manufacturers are claiming is, well, insulting. Yet their actions highlight a significant point, that change is uncomfortable and disruptive. Examples of disruptive changes include self-driving cars, personal computers, smartphones, and tablets. And disruptive changes even happen in the biblical narratives. Consider the disruptive information God delivered to Moses from a burning bush that was not consumed by flames. Moses couldn't believe what he saw before him. And when he inspected this odd thing, God spoke to him, changing his life, the life of the Egyptians, and the life of the captive Hebrews. Or consider when Peter, James, and John ascended to a mountaintop with Jesus, and suddenly they saw Jesus transfigured. They witnessed his face and appearance changing, and they heard a voice declare, "This is my Son, my chosen, listen to him." All of their lives were changed that day as Jesus was convinced that he needed to enter Jerusalem. Or consider when the women approached the tomb on Easter Sunday. They discovered Jesus was missing. Staring at this unbelievable event, suddenly they were informed by 2 men in dazzling clothes that Jesus had risen. And quickly the women ran to the disciples to declare the good news of Jesus' resurrection. And the world would never be the same again. Or consider when Silas and Paul disrupted the city of Philippi when they healed a young woman and saved the life of a Roman soldier. Now we'll return to those 2 individuals in a moment, but first a little background on this story in Acts. Prior to our reading, Paul had a dream, and in his vision, he saw a man from Macedonia who begged Paul to come over and help. Waking from the dream, Paul attempted a journey to Macedonia, but his attempts were blocked. However, Paul never viewed those attempts as failures. Rather, he saw them as necessary steps toward becoming a better Christian and learning to better understand God. Eventually, he and Silas made their way to Macedonia, specifically the city of Philippi. Yet Paul never met the man he saw in the vision. Instead, the first person he met was a Macedonian woman named Lydia, who owned and operated a textile company that specialized in creative, expensive purple cloth. After listening to Paul's testimony, she invited Paul to visit her home, and she and her household were baptized. She also provided financial support for Paul's ministry, and she gave him a place to establish a base of ministry operations. The next person Paul encountered, according to Acts, was another woman, this time a young woman who had the ability to divine the future, so that merchants, stockbrokers, and persons desperate to know what lay ahead paid her owners well for her services. Since her owners relied on her for their income, this is a testament to her ability to protect the future correctly. After Paul healed her and removed the spirit which tormented her and allowed her to know the future, her owners complained to the authorities that their rights were violated. It's important to note here that her owners under Roman property law could have brought a complaint against Silas and Paul for the loss of the value of their slave. Instead, they accused them of being dangerous political criminals who threatened Rome's Pax Romana with their Hebrew customs. And though the owners had complained to the authorities, they also riled up the crowd so that Paul and Silas were quickly surrounded by a mob and severely beaten. Perhaps watching from a short distance, the Roman officials allowed the mob violence to ensue, until finally at some point they intervened and dragged Paul and Silas into the innermost part of the prison. Chained to a wall, Paul and Silas attended to each other's wounds, and as God's people have often done throughout history when facing trouble, they began to pray and sing. Suddenly at midnight, the Spirit of God swept through the prison and shook the ground so that every prison door sprung open and the chains were unfastened. Now one would expect the prisoners to escape. This is what the jailer expected, and since the prisoners were his responsibility and he was unable to prevent their escape, he decided to end it right there. Filled with shame and humiliation, he drew his sword to kill himself. But as you heard earlier, Paul called out and urged the jailer not to harm himself. Confused by the fact that Paul and Silas and the rest of the prisoners had not fled from the prison, the jailer entered the jail cell with Paul and Silas and sat with these accused, dangerous criminals who disrupted the city. Yet he discovered they were falsely accused and were actually peaceful, law-abiding citizens. This was disruptive information that was at first surprising and confusing, but once accepted, it changed the jailer's view, and it changed his life. He invited Paul and Silas to his home for additional conversation about their beliefs. Then, accepting the disruptive information from Paul and Silas about God's activity in the world and why they remained in their open cell, he and his household were baptized. As the story in Acts reveals, the Christian faith continues to deliver disruptive information. One disruptive message this passage offers is that one is valued for who they are, not for what they do. Returning to the jail scene, following the earthquake, the Roman soldier wanted to know what he needed to do to be saved. And Paul informed him that you must believe in Christ. At first blush, this seems like a simple response, but it truly has a mighty impact. Paul was declaring that there is nothing one can do to be valuable. The truth is, we are made in God's image, and our worth or our value is in the fact that we have God's breath within us. Initially, the Roman guard missed this point because he believed his value relied solely on his job performance and his success. And even though we don't live in a first-century Roman world, we tend to share the jailer's belief that not an option. However, even as evident in Edison's life, failure can be steps to success. Yet failure or success, we are valuable to God. A second disruptive message from this passage is that our faith in Jesus leads us to serve others and practice hospitality. This disruption is probably the most difficult part for the world to understand and to accept. Clearly, when the jailer was surprised by Paul and Silas' unwillingness to flee for the exits of the prison following the earthquake, and that they helped save his life, it makes no sense. Yet the reason they didn't leave is that their faith in Jesus informed them to stay put and help someone in need, even if that someone was an enemy, a cog in the system of oppression, or a stranger. For the jailer, though confused at first, he realized that they didn't escape because they did not want harm to come to him. This encouraged the jailer to return their kindness, and he took them to his home and washed their wounds, and he practiced hospitality by throwing a feast for them. This type of response to claiming faith certainly can create confusion. This text serves as a reminder that when we express our faith through hospitality and show kindness to others, we, the church, may be accused of political offenses, or as Paul and Silas discovered, we may face far more serious charges. A modern example of this happened to a woman in Texas when she helped someone because she believed it was what Jesus would do. In February, a mother of a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old was driving home, and a young man who looked about the age of her oldest son stood on the side of a highway and flagged her down, desperate for help. She pulled over and discovered that he was traveling with his sister and their younger brother. But their younger brother had become very ill, possibly suffering from dehydration. Since it was a chilly Texas night, she invited the three persons into her car so they could stay warm with the car's heater. And then frantically, she began texting friends to get advice about getting medical assistance for the young boy when a sheriff's car pulled up behind her. The deputy ordered all four passengers out of the vehicle and arrested the woman for assisting immigrants. She says this event is surreal. She was simply living out her faith and helping a human being in need, as Jesus taught us to do. Yet she was detained for 3 hours, and though finally released, she's still waiting for a federal prosecutor to determine if she will face federal charges of harboring aliens. At first, the Texas woman says she grumbled about suffering humiliation from this situation. But now she says she understands that being detained has given her insight, so she is now working to shed a light on where we as a society, with God's guidance, need to make a change. She says she didn't know that they weren't supposed to be in the United States. In fact, she asks, is that truly the litmus test of care or not care for a stranger? By the way, as it turned out, the youngest was hospitalized with a life-threatening medical need. But, as she says, should that matter? As Christ followers, we are instructed to care for each other and be good Samaritans to all people. For the woman in Texas, she has revealed that the policies we have enacted regarding how we treat people needs to change. She has delivered God's message for change. And when asked if she would do it again, she says absolutely, because the benefit of saving a life reveals God's presence. Our hospitality reveals God's activity in the world. And as people of faith, we may find ourselves in a similar position that Paul and Silas found themselves after they helped a woman troubled by a spirit. And we may find ourselves in a similar position that the woman in Texas found herself. Yet, we help anyway. And by helping, we may come under fire from hostile voices, and we may risk mob violence when we care about the least of these, or deliver disruptive information that every being is made in God's image. Yet it is our responsibility to care for each other. As followers of Christ, when our disruptive message is rejected and is met with hostility and suspicion, it is at those times we join together and sing songs and pray as we learn from God who strengthens our faith, so we will obey Jesus and feed and tend to his sheep. We are being equipped daily to shed a light on what God has planned for change into the world, hearing God speak so that we care for each other. Let us learn to embrace God's disruptive changes so that together we will see the transformation that God will unfold as chains are broken and captives released. We will see the transformation that God will provide as justice is provided for the oppressed and peace is granted for those harmed by injustice, so that the life of Christ is revealed and available to all for our selfless acts of hospitality. Now, it may take us a few attempts to care for each other properly, but instead of seeing those attempts as failures, let us see these as steps toward becoming better Christians as we learn to better understand God and as we care for each other. Working with God, let us follow wherever the Spirit will lead so that through hospitality we will care for each other and usher into the world God's changes and transformation, which will bring release to the captives, justice for the oppressed, and peace to those harmed by injustice. And as we respond to God's disruptive message, I invite you to stand as you're